questions come in later, if you could, one
Yes,
of you
yes,
could
sir.
coordinate that rather than
Yes,
have
sir.
all
Okay.
of them coming at me.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. We will take the
Yeah.
question and we'll request him
Yeah.
to write.
And yeah, and tell people to please mute because I get otherwise a lot of disturbance
Okay,
in
sir.
mine.
Surely.
Yeah. Okay.
Surely.
Thanks. Yeah. Right. You can start.
So just one more thing, Tanmay, before we begin. So the questions are going to be sent to you, right? To
They
your
can write down in the comment section.
okay, they can write down in the comments, and then you are going to coordinate.
Yeah. The problem is if they keep sending me questions on the chat, for me it's difficult to follow which one. By the time I respond to one, there are three others.
No, no, sir. I will bring them out.
Sure, that would be better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we are going. Okay, Tanmay.
Yes, 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 yes.
Okay, so you are live now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And it is our pleasure and honor both to host today a very premium academician of India who is known internationally, Dr. Pramod Kumar Nayar of Hyderabad Central University. Pramod Kumar Nayar is a name in himself, and if the phrase that he requires no introduction can be applied to anyone, he is one such, a legendary professor and someone who has got expertise in diverse fields of study, and all of us have read books written by him. It's not possible to cover all the books written by him because he expertly writes on um, as I said, diverse areas and fields, and um, books are both scholarly and also student friendly, balance which is very, very difficult to achieve. But Dr. Nayar achieves that. He is, as I said, one of the top intellectuals of our country, one of the top professors of our country, and very recently he has been awarded as one of the top researchers by Savitribai Phule University. So it is both our honor and prestige and good fortune that today Dr. Pramod Kumar Nair is going to spend time with us. He will speak on the environmental humanities, and the lecture is entitled An Introduction to the Environmental Humanities. I could go on reading out the names of the books that he has written, but they are so many, and I guess most of us are aware of his work. Just two of the books that I would like to mention here. One came out in 2019 called Eco Precarity: Vulnerable Lives in Literature and Culture, and another, Bhopal's Ecological Gothic: Disaster, Precarity, and the Biopolitical Uncanny, that came out in 2017. With these few words, I would like to introduce humbly to Midnapur College, again acknowledging what a great honor this is for us to host you, sir. Please welcome, and I would now like to request you to please deliver your lecture. And just one more thing to everyone, please have your microphones on mute so that no unnecessary noise reaches or disturbs our speaker. And also, if you have any queries and questions, please put them in the chat box. Our head of the department, Professor Tanmay Kundu, will be reading them out after the lecture to Professor Nair. So let's all be regaled by the erudite lecture that we have been waiting for. Dr. Pramod Kumar Nair, sir.
Thank you, Tanmoy and Saikat, and thank you to Midnapore College as well. I know Tanmoy has been trying to win me over for quite some time, and something or the other crops up, and I have not been able to actually make the trip. So, what the uh, normal conditions could not allow, the coronavirus has allowed for us to at least meet virtually. Um, when Tanmoy wrote the idea of the talk and we were looking around for topics, I had a few ideas that I batted with him about, and we settled on environmental humanities, which we think would be something relevant, topical, timely, given the circumstances in which we find ourselves, unfortunately. And also because in the recent past, I have been working and publishing in and around the field of eco-precarity, uh, where precarious lives as a broad category, precarious lives, is not about precarious human lives alone, but extends to far more other life forms and non-living materials on Earth. So what we characterize as eco-precarity is the precariousness of lives of more than human species, of more than the human race. Given what Corona has managed to achieve, it is relevant to think in terms of precarious lives. And if you have been following debates in and around the mass media, you know that there are racial angles to this. The morbidity rate among African Americans may be low or high, but the mortality rate is higher. 74% of the people of the population that died due to corona in Bhopal are survivors of the gas tragedy. So they already were damaged in terms of immune systems, completely unable to cope with the assault of this new viral pathogen. In short, uh, the virus is not necessarily democratic and doesn't target everyone. Recent studies which I have been following and mass media reports that I've been following show very clearly that there's a race angle, there's a class angle to the victims of a particular kind of pathogen. So people with no access to drinking water, people whose immune systems have been already severely compromised because of bad nutrition over past several decades, people whose living conditions are terrible, are all more vulnerable than others. So when we speak about vulnerability is actually a differential thing. So the environmental humanity is concerned about these kinds of situations as well. So let's look at what the environmental humanities consists of. And as I said, it is an introduction, so we'll look at a few items which are relevant to how we understand uh, what can be termed a particularly significant development in the humanities field itself. Okay, so one of the uh, my opening comment would be to do with what does environmental humanities consist of. The field of environmental humanities consists of disciplines from social sciences and the humanities both. So it involves eco-criticism. Many of us in the literature departments are aware of eco-criticism, practice it, research it. Ecosophy, which is actually ecological philosophy and comes from the philosophy departments and discipline. Geography, histories of the environment, and environmental ethics. So I identify 5 key components of the environmental humanities. Eco-criticism, which is primarily to do with the discipline of literary studies. Ecosophy, which comes from philosophical disciplines. Geography, histories of the environment, and environmental ethics. The field of environmental humanities is a more integrated approach to the perceived crisis of the environment. By perceived crisis, we are not thinking of just speculating on imminent crisis. The crisis has been in the offing and we've been experiencing this crisis for quite some time now. So it's not like one fine morning we woke up and said, oh my God, there's a crisis in the environment. Some of you may be aware of the fact that we are in the midst of a crisis. We have been in the midst of a crisis for quite some time. Okay, the field has been described as asking fundamental questions of meaning, value, responsibility, and purpose in a time of rapid and escalating change. I quote this definition of the field from the journal Environmental Humanities. It's published by Duke University Press, and this was the definition given in its inaugural issue. I will read that out again for you. The field of environmental humanities asks fundamental questions of meaning, value, responsibility, and purpose in a time of rapid and escalating change. But what does the environmental humanities do? Environmental humanities possesses a new environmental imagination. I'm adapting here Lawrence Guell's work from the Environmental Imagination. The title of the book is The Environmental Imagination. And the new environmental imagination has multiple, like I said, sources. It has insights from a variety of disciplines. Multispecies ethnography, human and non-human geography, ethics, social studies of technology, histories of climate change, critical animal studies, and evolutionary biology. So what are we talking about here? We are talking about the bringing together of multiple disciplines into this field. Multi-species ethnography, human and non-human geography, and this is very important. When we speak about, say, landscape, when we speak about, say, non-human geography, we are actually going to take into account the fact that our ecosystem around us, whether it's in the body or our immediate environment of the home or the setting outside in your residential complex or your colony where you live, consists of human and non-human actors. It also consists of living and non-living actors. So we need to stop thinking about ecosystems and the environment as centered around the human. See, one of the biggest flaws in human thought has been to assume we are the crown of creation and we are the center of the world. No, we are not. We are what we are because we share space, time, vulnerability with other forms of life. Because we are constituted by other forms, living and non-living. So when we say geography, we have to account for human and non-human geography as well. Ethics, the principles by which we deal with the world. Social studies of technology, commonly abbreviated as SOT, that technology is not to be debated by technologists alone. All technology has a social aspect in its development, in its evolution, and in its consequences. Histories of climate change. I have requested Tanmoy to share a couple of links. I'm sure you've got those links already with you. Please go through that. The one I'm referring to at this point is a NASA website, which will give you updated, most relevant visuals and statistics on global climate change. It's available free online. The link is there. Please go take a look. Right? And it looks at evolutionary biology, how people have evolved over centuries, and how, for example, those who study evolution have noted the fact that we evolved with other animals. At what point was the horse or the dog domesticated? How have we co-evolved with them? How did agriculture make use of other creatures? What contributes to our ecosystem? Okay, so there are these 6 or 7 categories from where we borrow insights, and it also involves multiple concepts, newer concepts like the Anthropocene. It involves new forms of literature like cli-fi. I don't know whether you have heard the term before. Cli-fi, CLI-FI, which is actually climate change fiction. So cli-fi, like science, sci-fi, we now have a genre called cli-fi. Okay? And then popular cultural texts on eco-disasters and others. Okay. Now, why is this a different form of the humanities? As it does it show progress? Is it an advancement over the traditional humanities? The traditional environmentalists were always concerned with the relationship of the human life form with the environment. Okay, with the human life form and the environment. The environmental humanities make slight shifts here. It asks us to consider the relations of non-human life forms also with the environment. The relations of humans with non-humans. The co-evolution, cooperation, and mutual dependence of various life forms. Now, let me give you just one example. I'm sure several of you are aware that we have lots of bacteria in our stomach, right? In the human stomach. These bacteria 10 raised to power 14 numbers. Those bacteria help you digest your food. And if those bacteria are there, you are in trouble. So for the food to be digested properly, you need to have these bacteria working. And I'm sure you know people who have to take probiotics, yeast, and other things, more curd, for example, as I say, to generate the bacteria essential for us. Now, think about this. When you think you are the crown of creation, when you think you are highly evolved creatures, you survive because the bacteria help you survive. Are you not mutually dependent, symbiotic, as the biological term goes? The bacteria need you to survive. You need the bacterium to survive. It's mutually constitutive process. So it's important to understand that we have co-evolved with them. It's not like the human race progressed like this and the rest of them progressed like this. No, it's not like that. It was never like that. We have evolved like this, but we have always evolved along with others, attached to our systems of thinking, bodies, our processes, and things like that. That means we have actually evolved like this. If this is human life, these are other life forms, and we evolved like this. We didn't evolve in parallel fashion. No. The mistake we make is in assuming that humans evolved on their own, that humans evolved by themselves. We didn't evolve by ourselves. Never. We never have. And that's important for us to recognize, right? So let's understand that evolution is always co-evolution, cooperation. That's what environmental humanities teaches us. I mentioned in passing that a key component of environmental humanities is multi-species ethnography. What do we mean by multi-species ethnography? Multi-species ethnography was been termed entangled lives. Entangled is a very favorite, very preferred term in people like Donna Haraway and people who are like Anat Singh, who work with multiple life forms, plants, and trees, and other animals, and of course humans. To prove that our lives are entangled with other life forms, that humans, when we evolve, have led very messy, very entangled lives like this. It's not separate, like I said. That we have missed each other's lives. We've been entangled with each other's lives. So it's not that if we do whatever we want, it only affects us. That's not true. What we do affects other life forms. Other life forms do affect us. So let's be very clear about this point, that landscape, weather, climate, other life forms, the tectonic plates under the earth are all things that affect us. They are not out there like some rare species of things, like something distant. All of these are a part of what we call entangled lives. So in multi-species ethnography, we have to account for the fact that our lives have always been mutually constituted by other life forms. Our futures are connected. This shouldn't come as much of a surprise when you think about the fact that at this point in time, your lives and mine, those of the people we love, are all placed in jeopardy because of a virus. Can you really say that your life is independent of what's going on around you? Your neighbor may have COVID. When you go to office, somebody may have COVID there. The shopkeeper from whom you buy material may have COVID. COVID is everywhere. The people who have lived together are asked to stay separate. You can't shake hands. If I'd come to Midnapore College in the middle of this to meet all of you, do you think I would have shaken hands? No. Would you have shaken hands with me? No. We would have stood at a considerable distance, wearing our masks. You wouldn't even know whether it's Pramod Nayar who has come there. When Tanmay introduces himself as Tanmay, it may not be Tanmay Pandey Saikat. How do I know? Everybody is masked anyway. You can only see up to here. Everybody looks like a superhero behind masks, right? Nobody quite knows who's the other person. And at meetings, you do not know who has said anything because you can't hear anybody very clearly because everybody is wearing masks and everybody is speaking in, with a muffled tones. Do you think our lives have been separated? No, our lives have been entangled in ways in which we have never been able to imagine, to be able to even see what's going on. You know, so I want you to understand this very significant aspect of what we see as uh, the rise of multi-species ethnography as the crucial component of our lives now. You know, I will share a small definition with you for in a minute. Let me see if I can. I don't know whether you are seeing the screen I have sent up, but anyway, yeah. So the point we should keep in mind is that our lives are entangled now, and there is no escaping this. So multi-species ethnography, and then we move on to the next component, the Anthropocene. What is the Anthropocene? Many of you are aware of periods in geological time, right? The Cenozoic era, the Triassic era, the Jurassic era, the Holocene, just several categories, several historical demarcations that geologists have made in terms of geological time. The Anthropocene is geological time, but is linked to the dating of the impact of human civilization on the environment. Okay, it goes back to the time from where human impact on the environment has been tangible and visible. What does that mean? For people who are working with the Anthropocene as a concept, they are trying to figure out from which era in history can we see that human interference and influence on the environment has been particularly significant. The term was defined in various ways by Paul Crutzen. Its actual date is still debated. But the point they're making is human impact on the loss of biodiversity, pollution, the depletion of natural resources, and climate change. These are factors over which humans have had a direct and in many cases irreversible influence and impact. So the Anthropocene is a geological time measured in terms of the human impact on the environment. Anthropo, connected to humanity, that's why anthropo. And from what time? So people have argued that it dates back to the Industrial Revolution. Others claim the Anthropocene begins with organized farming and agriculture and things like that. So there is actually no clear-cut, shall we say, definition about this. People still argue. So some say agriculture, nuclear age. But we can think of 4 areas in which human influence and impact have been very critical. First, the loss of biodiversity, pollution, the depletion of resources, and climate change. Uh, I'm getting some disturbance on my earphone, Tanmoy.
Is it
Hello.
okay now, sir? Is it okay?
Yeah, but there's still something in the background. Okay, now it has stopped. But am I audible, but?
sir. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, fine. I'll carry on. Yeah. So the important thing to recognize is the Anthropocene is a history of human intervention in the environment. The Anthropocene is a term used to define the point at which the historical geological time from which we can date our irreversible impact on the environment. Why do I say irreversible? Why am I emphasizing this? Because many of the things humans have done, many of the things humans have embarked on are very clearly changing the course of events in nature. So, for instance, when we first prepared manufactured these huge dams, what did we do? We changed the course of rivers. By cutting down forests, we changed the course of monsoons. By digging deeper and deeper and deeper into the soil for minerals or whatever it might be, we disturb the tectonic plates. What we have done as a race is the irreversible consequences on land, water, non-living parts of the earth, and of course other life forms. We have changed the weather. We have changed the shape of mountains, rivers, the levels of toxicity in water. We have changed rains. The Anthropocene is a usually destructive but definitely high impact influence on the environment. And this is something we need to understand as, I'm not quite sure whether we can think of it as a defining feature of humanity, but it's definitely something people in the future generations, assuming there will be future generations and we are not all killed by COVID, will note that when, for instance, industrial revolution happened, we invented steam, we invented steam engine, we did this, we mechanized agriculture, we did a whole lot of things. I mean, I don't want to become the history of the industrial revolution. You can look that up for yourself. We changed several things. We did enormously. We changed lives for us as humans, but we also changed lives of other species on Earth, other life forms on Earth. So what's important is to understand that humans have always had an extraordinarily high impact existence. That is why we have to be more careful that what we do affects so many other things. So that's why the idea of the Anthropocene has become very popular, that uh, you have to recognize that humans have always been extremely influential. Okay? So that was my second key concept, multi-species ethnography. The second is the Anthropocene. The third is critical animal studies. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of a field called animal studies, and this is a version of that. By animal studies, please do not think we are looking at biologists. No, we are looking at philosophies that deal with the question of the human-animal encounter. We are looking at principles about how we treat animals, political activism around animals, and the linkage between various forms of human oppression, racism, sexism, ableism, and what has been called speciesism. Okay? So the human oppression over other species of life is called speciesism. Okay? The human oppression over other forms of life. When we oppress other animals, we also oppress other races, other genders, people whose bodies are different from ours. It's called ableism. We discriminate against older people, ageism, and so on. What's important is for critical animal studies is that once humanity discovers methods of oppressing one species, it will oppress other species as well. So when we created this hierarchy of humans over other animals, we also created hierarchies over other humans. What do we mean by this? Once we have designated, once we have defined ourselves as humans as superior to other animals, we also then extend it to say some races among humans are superior to other human races, other human species, other human ethnicities. Think of what I'm suggesting. Once humanity, the human race, defines itself as higher than, more evolved than other life forms, other animals or plants, we will then also argue that some of us are better than other races, which is the basic principle of racism. Racism leads to xenophobia, it leads to anti-Semitism, it leads to race-based discrimination, it produces caste hierarchies. And if you learn to oppress in the name of race, then you will oppress in the name of gender. In short, critical animal studies points to the fact that once we learn to oppress and discriminate on the basis of racial identity over other animals, we have merged racism with sexism and speciesism. Speciesism is one word. It is the principle of racial distinction applied to other species, other life forms. Okay, so critical animal studies also examines the conversion of animals into objects for capitalism and globalization. So it traces the link between discourses of inequality and the practice of, say, animal killing. And it demands an ethical commitment to uh, other life forms. So that was my third one. I'll now move on to ecosophy or ecological philosophy. Okay. In 2010, Tim Morton published a very important book called The Ecological Thought, The Ecological Thought, and argued that ecological thinking must involve the humanities and the sciences. It requires us to move beyond the immediate and the local, to think in terms of the global and the planetary. So when we say act locally and think globally, you have to think beyond the immediate impact, beyond the immediate location of where you live. You have to think big. Okay? So you have to say local policies must be based on local needs, on local conditions. Yes. However, global conditions like global warming demand a global response naturally. There is no way we can think of global warming and the responses to global warming as working at the level of the local alone. There has to be a concerted global level initiative. Just as now we see the fight against the pandemic is not localized. It cannot be localizable. It cannot be restricted to one specific zone alone, primarily because by virtue of being a pandemic, it is beyond. It is beyond a specific geographical location. Okay, so we have to think of local policies, local needs, local conditions, but we also have to think simultaneously about global situations like global warming. We have to see ourselves not embedded here, but from another vantage point. And Tim Morton proposes that perhaps we should see ourselves from outer space. Look from there at Earth. This is Earth. Morton is speaking essentially of vantage point and perspective, as you can imagine, right? So how we view the world. So we don't view the world evenly because we are located in specific local conditions. How about if you were up here? How about if you were outside the Earth? How would you see the Earth? So a response to globe, Earth, you, me, all of us on this Earth would be different if you are viewing it from somewhere up there, a vantage point beyond the Earth. And until such time as we change our vantage point, until such time as we move beyond the immediacy of the local, there's no hope. Therefore, Tim Morton proposes that instead of seeing lives as separate, we think in terms of interconnectedness. Meshes, things are meshed together. Remember, I spoke to you about entanglements. Morton also emphasizes this, that we are all entangled creatures and our lives are all interconnected. And I gave you the example of how we live now. If your neighbor has COVID, you are at risk. Previously, you never thought about the neighbor. Previously, you never, unless you were attracted to the neighbor, you never particularly gave particular attention to the neighbor. Unless, of course, the neighbor is also a nuisance, in which case you have lots of reasons to be paying attention to. But suddenly you discover you're worried. Does your neighbor have COVID? Does your next street have COVID? Does your next town have COVID? Is somebody coming from outside your residential area to your area? Our lives have become messily entangled. Our futures have become entangled. Our eventual existence has become mutually entangled. I wanted to understand the significance of this. No longer can we say, no longer can we argue that we are leading individual autonomous lives. No longer can we say that we are independent, autonomous, self-contained. What we recognize, and something that COVID has made abundantly clear, is that our lives are mutually dependent because we are mutually vulnerable. It is this shared vulnerability, the shared precarity that Judith Butler first started talking about in 2004 and continues to speak about it. Work that I've done in the last few years have all been around vulnerability. In fact, I think of it as a kind of precarity quartet. It's going to be a quintet because I've got a book coming out on human rights in the graphic novel soon, which also is built around the idea of vulnerability. So the point is that we need to understand entangled lives are not about mutual support alone, they're also about mutual vulnerabilities. This is important, okay? And we are not idealizing nature. We are not idealizing nature, okay? We have to understand that we have to think in terms of uncertainty, instability, and what Tim Watson would call dark ecology. It's not ecology as we traditionally understand it. So the Wordsworthian ideal of romantic nature is no longer something we abide by. Instead, we have dark ecology, irony, contingency, ugliness, horror. We may not have an apocalyptic imagination. We may not have an apocalyptic imagination. We may not think of the end of the world, though if you have been following debates in the mass media, people are speaking about the end of the world because of COVID and things like that. I don't know. I don't think in apocalyptic terms. There are other people who do that and make a lot of fame and money out of it. I don't. But it's important to recognize that we definitely are embedded within what Morton calls dark ecology. Okay, so this is a crucial component of what I want to say about the environment, humanities, and its dark ecology. In the midst of all this, I'm sure several of you wonder what philosophy has to do with all this. Well, environmental humanities adopts a lot of thinking from something called deep ecology. Deep ecology was first coined and conceptualized by Arne and is traced back to the writings of the most significant first thinker on the subject, Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring. Paul Ehrlich also. What does deep ecology do? First, deep ecology believes all life forms are equally valuable. It believes in the sanctity of all life forms. Therefore, following from that, it rejects the primacy of the human race. It rejects the supremacy of the human race. Third, like the Anthropocene I defined for you, it argues that it is human intervention that damages all ecosystems. That life on Earth, the Earth itself would have continued, but for the fact that we intervene in very significant ways. that we intervenes, and like I said, irreversibly. It's a crucial component of what we are saying here. It believes that human population growth is incompatible with the conservation of Earth's biodiversity. As long as human population continues to grow at this particular rate, at this pace, it's very, very difficult to actually think in terms of how other life forms will survive. Because we are such a colonizing race, we will take over the world. Okay? So it's important we understand this. This means, very simply, and this brings us closer to, shall we say, home, what the ecological imagination does for us in literature. It's not only the ecological imagination, my friends, is not only about a concern for the environment and its aesthetic appreciation in Wordsworth or whatever it might be. No. It's a concern increasingly, and that's why the ecological imagination is central to environmental humanities. The ecological imagination now has a very deep concern for three or four things: climate change, industrialization, pollution, the genocide of other life forms, and the loss of other forms of knowledge. Okay? Now, it's important we understand this, that ecological imagination is therefore not only about saying, oh, nature is so beautiful. Yeah, nature may or may not be beautiful. Not all nature is beautiful. The problem with saying all nature is beautiful is because we have been too influenced by Wordsworth. And we know that nature is not always beautiful. I mean, let's accept it. It's a romanticization. It's an idealization of nature. Nature is not always beautiful. It has moments of natural beauty, shall we say. You know? But the point is not that. The point is not that we think of nature in aesthetic terms alone. The ecological imagination that we now require demands that we see nature in ethical terms. In ethical terms, right? Please understand that. It's a shift we are talking about. It's a very important shift. So it's not the aesthetic component, it's the ethical component. And that requires us to think in terms of climate change, industrialization, pollution, what we're doing to rivers and other resources, the genocide of life forms, and the loss of other ways of life. Okay? Because we are in the COVID age, because we are living through the COVID age, I think it's more appropriate that I conclude my talk with the final theme that I have, globalization and ecological concerns. Okay? Since the mid 1990s, roughly, various countries have undertaken what has been called structural adjustment programs. Right? You've heard of SAPs, structural adjustment programs. Many international agencies have done this. They've been influential in terms of policies and all that. And these involve the privatization of natural resources. We all know that. The sale of natural resources, primarily third world nations selling it to first world companies owning our land, our minerals, our valuable minerals under the soil, metal, the globalization of water, the privatization of water, and things like that. Nations serve as testing and dumping grounds for toxins and unwanted materials from the first world. Increasingly, we find less and less subsidization of farmers, health, education, and welfare, less taxation on global firms, and things like that. And the national inequalities increase. There are very specific angles, ecological angles to globalization, which we need to also address. As in, what I'm talking about here is that there are very clear bits of evidence that globalization has extremely dangerous impact on our local ecosystems, but also global ones. That is, it's not restricted to just your or my locality. It's not restricted to your house, your home, and mine. Okay, that is, what we have to understand is that the impact of globalization is first not measurable. It's not always measurable. It is sometimes tangible, and it takes a lot of time over a period of time to really understand what effects that global move uh, has upon others. And when Rob Nixon speaks about something like slow violence, I'm sure you've heard the phrase before. Slow violence by Rob Nixon is a concept that he has coined to talk about how certain consequences of the violence undertaken in terms of policies are not tangible immediately. It takes time for it to be visible, to have its much larger consequences. So globalization's effects are not visible in immediate, so it may not be visible in your lifetime and mine. It will be tangible and visible over a longer period of time, which is why Rob Nixon thinks of it as slow violence. It takes a lot of time to show up, to be effective, to be effectual. But there are other aspects of globalization. I've shared a couple of links on this subject also with Tanmoy, which he will send out to people who have registered for the talk. One is trade and trafficking in wildlife, which is very clearly linked to globalization. The desertification of the world, global warming, the loss of biodiversity, and I would suggest you take a look at the Living Planet Index at www.panda.org, which also shows you the loss of biodiversity, species disappearing, and the Global Biodiversity Outlook, where the Global Biodiversity Index shows we are increasingly losing life forms. We have fewer and fewer numbers of life forms. Where the variety is going down. Now, yeah, I have said before that globalization has consequences spread across a longer period of time, what I call slow violence. But I also said that you can't battle a global situation purely at the global level, right? If you recall the early part of what I was talking about, unless you have all, of course, fallen asleep out of sheer boredom. In the early part of my talk, I said that there are very clear indications that certain battles of globalization have to be fought at global levels, like global warming and other issues that concern large areas of land and people and numbers of people have to be battled at global level. So it cannot be just a local phenomenon or a local battle. There are therefore massive global efforts underway. That while globalization has enormous negative consequences upon the world, a counter movement or a counter globalization is also underway, where the negative consequences of globalization also had to be fought out at global levels. Now, you might say this is a very peculiar situation. Yes, it is a peculiar situation. That globalization, which spans the world and has dangerous consequences for the planet as a whole, will also have to be fought at multiple levels, which are global. Okay. So if you look at the United Nations Convention to Battle Desertification, I'm referring to 3 or 4 major global initiatives. I would suggest you go look it up. The United Nations Convention to Battle Desertification, the London Dumping Convention, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Convention on Global Biodiversity, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is perhaps one of the most famous, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Why are these important? Most of these initiatives require the global cooperation of nations and focus on regions in different parts of the world. So it's not that it is focused on one or two, it's focused on the entire world. So victimly poor natives, and processes that are detrimental to local ecosystems are all covered under this. So what we are looking at is globalization on the one hand, which proceeds in a certain way, which proceeds in a particular fashion to you know to negatively impact the local region, the village, or the city, but also a counter globalization which battles these things at a global level. Greenpeace is a significant example. Greta Thunberg right now is an example where one initiative at one particular point becomes a global movement. So while globalization has the negative impacts that we have already looked at, globalization also produces a counter globalization campaign. Greenpeace and the green movements are all instances of this particular counter globalization. I'm going to stop here. We have done 50 minutes, and I'm hoping many of you will have questions so that it will be a more interactive session rather than just have this one person speaking and going on for the term of your natural life and death by boredom. Okay, so please do send in your questions to Saikat and Tanmoy, and we can have a little chat.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for this enlightening, engaging session, exhaustive, really. So, as I requested them to write their questions in the comment box, so already we have received questions. So, one from named Devargo Ganguly. Sir, I'm reading out the question. So, Devargo Ganguly has asked, do you think that the pandemic can be read in the critical post-humanist light?
I didn't get the last part. Can the pandemic be read?
Yes, do you think that the pandemic can be read in the critical post-humanist light?
Oh, yes, yes. Good question, and it's a very incisive, insightful question.
I think, sir, you may recall that we had once before approached you for a seminar on post-humanism in 2019 September.
That Tanmoy is just trying to remind me of the number of times he's invited and he didn't come.
Okay, sir.
Very clever, Tanmoy. But to go back to the question, yes,
Yes.
it's a very good one. Whether it can be read through critical post-humanist lens, yes. If you think about it, we spoke about critical. We know critical posthumanism looks at the entanglement of lives of various kinds, life forms of various kinds, and there's no hierarchy. The virus has disturbed the borders of lives. We are not quite sure whether there is animal to human and human to animal transmission of the virus. The World Health Organization and other experts have said no, there isn't. That we don't get it from dogs and cats and etc., and that we don't pass it on to them either. But we are not sure, primarily because the virus, by definition, is a mutating and mutative organism. We have to understand that the level of complex entanglements which the virus forces us to engage upon makes it suitable for a critical post-humanist reading. So good question. Congratulations on thinking slightly differently. Thank you. Yeah.
Again, sir, that question put by Devarga Ganguly. Again, another questions in addition to the first one. Does the selective species-based approach on the virus posit an antithesis to species supremacy of human discourses?
Well, I don't think anybody now believes in the supremacy of the human any longer, do we? Given the fact that it has proved to be a complete disaster, I don't think any of us has any right to believe, unless you are particularly stupid or particularly determined, like some heads of state, that we are supreme. One little, as I've said in another talk, one little bit of protein wearing a jacket has caused such a large havoc across this planet, and we think we are supreme. Imagine our ironic arrogance to assume we are supreme when just one little particle, which we cannot even see, has humbled us. So there's no question of the supremacy and the superiority of the human any longer. It's an untenable faith.
Okay, sir. So next, Sandeep Mishra, he has wanted to know, is environmental humanity is a part of eco-criticism movement, quote unquote, eco-criticism movement?
No, eco-criticism is a part of the environmental humanities. Environmental humanities is much bigger because environmental humanities also requires insights from philosophy, from social studies of technology, and a host of other disciplines. So, eco-criticism is a subset which is primarily a literary studies phenomenon.
Again, Soista Rahman, he has asked how we can locate green politics in the text. So, would you please suggest some text?
Well, green politics, like I was outlining about ecosophy, is not only about the aesthetic appreciation of nature. You say that, oh, nature in this particular text is beautiful, nature in that particular text is hideous. No, that's not the point. The green politics must have an ethical angle to it. That's the crucial part. It must address questions of major ethical concerns that we now have. So it's not enough to think of green politics or green aesthetics solely in terms of the quote unquote beauties of nature. We have to think in terms of political economy. Who owns the land? How is beautification achieved? Parks are often built by kicking off the people who live there, isn't it? We have to think about that. How many other forms of life have we, as in humans, displaced to create these grand acts of parks and things like that? So, green politics requires us to have an ethical stance. And it is not only about aesthetics, it involves looking at questions of political economy, labor, displacement, the interactions with other life forms, to name five. The larger one would be how does a text deal with questions of climate change or sustainability?
Yes, sir. So there
Yeah.
is Sheikh Tariq Ali, my friend. He's an assistant professor in college. He has asked, does Morton dark ecology anyway resemble Lawrence Lawrence Buell's idea of toxic discourse?
Yes. I mentioned both Morton and Buell in passing. Both their works, major writers. Toxic discourse is central to both ecosophy and eco-criticism. So we have to think in terms of discourses about toxicity, representations of the toxic, and toxic discourse will also include looking at the presence of speciesism, in my view, where we speak negatively about animals and thereby and extend it to include other races as well. So ecological imagination and the new I'm sorry, environmental humanities will involve the study of toxic discourse. Good point by Tariq, yes.
So again, there is a Professor Hossein Mamun from Bangladesh. He has asked, would you please comment something on South Asian narratives on eco-critical studies?
By which you mean what exactly? Comment on South Asian narratives?
Yes, sir.
No, I didn't get the question. Comment on which South Asian narratives?
On eco-critical studies. South Asian narratives
Uh,
on eco-critical studies.
I don't know whether this is the forum for us to discuss bibliographies
Yes,
of
yes.
this kind. So I would strongly recommend you start by looking at people like Tim Morton and others, and then narrowing it down to South Asian studies. There are studies being done on South Asia toxic discourse. Which I'm aware of, and research is being done on South Asian writers. There is a lot of stuff being done on nature and the Northeast poets in India. That kind of material is there, but that is a different field altogether to look at South Asian literature in general. But among South Asian environmentalists, I would strongly recommend you read people like Vandana Shiva.
So, sir, can we take two or three questions more?
Yes, please, of course, go right ahead.
Yes, yes, sir. So there is a Soikat Chakraborty. He has asked, how do you connect the biological other virus to the communal other in an anthropocentric world?
The biological other with the what?
Biological other to the communal other in
Uh-huh.
an anthropocentric world.
Communal other. In an anthropocentric world. Okay. That's a nice challenging area for you to actually research. Did you say the name was Saikat?
Soikat Chakrabarti, yes.
The Saikat Chakra. Saikat Chakrabarti, it's an area you might want to explore as a good research project if you are looking for one, or if you are already on the faculty, then there might be a paper here for you to explore. So I'll give you a couple of ways of thinking about it, and you might want to build on that. The point is, whenever we think in terms of a biological self, we always also think in terms of a biological other. So when we speak about an anthropocentric view, the human is the biological self and other animals are the biological others. I, as in a representative of the human race, see the dog or the cat or the bat or whatever it might be as my biological other. The point for us to be aware of is this biological other is part of the ecosystem where I live. I cannot separate the biological other from myself. I mean, I can, but you must understand that we have mutually precarious lives. So, in many ways, the biological other does give us an insight into a communal construction, a communitarian construction of an ecosystem where the biological other is not my opposite, is not my antagonistic negative opposite. It is a continuum on which I am located with that biological other. So I would like to propose to you that you start thinking in terms of biological slash ontological, not in the not as separate categories, but biological, ontological, and then how this moves to a certain communitarian or communal sense of who we are. My second clue is, please look at the point I have made before on entangled lives and think carefully about it, how the idea of entanglements. I would refer to the work of Anna Singh, ANNA, last name Singh, Tsing. She's an anthropologist. I would urge you to look at her work. She's worked on the Malaysian rainforest, as I recall, and the book is called Friction. Please take a look at it. So two things, like I said, the biological, ontological, which morphs into the communitarian, and the other one, which I just outlined, the sense of shared ecosystems, shared vulnerabilities, and the entangled lives. Those two cycles are, I suggest, points of departure, and I think you have an interesting topic ahead of you. Thank you.
So there is Tushar Kanti Karmakar. He has just asked, what role do imaginative texts play in the study of environmental humanity?
They are very central to our study of the environmental humanities. They construct for us alternate worlds about how the world ought to be. They tell us about how humans have perceived, represented, assimilated other forms of life. And they also offer us ethical views as to how this relationship can be changed. So I think of literary texts as being at the core of the environmental humanities.
Okay, so Ayushman Banerjee, would you kindly elaborate on the points of intersection between eco-criticism and post-humanism? So I think this answer has been answered already.
Yeah, I've done that and I've written about it. So I'm a little bored, but I'll give you one little clue. Eco-criticism, which looks at the entanglements of life forms, which looks at the merger of our different racial life forms, is part of post-humanist thought. So in the environmental humanities, where we have begun to see entangled lives, that's where the post-human thought also begins.
Another question put by Sheikh Tariq Ali. When you speak about a global environmental protection movement in this globalized world, should we look beyond not in my backyard to the not in anybody's backyard? Shall I
I
repeat
don't
it
know
again?
whether we can make, I don't think we can make very clear-cut distinctions any longer about these, which is the point I was trying to make, that it's not possible to think in terms of exclusively local or global. That barrier has been broken down. There is no such thing as an isolated, insulated, self-contained autonomous local population. Any change globally affecting the Eastern Pacific at some point will have an impact in the south of Bengal. Anything that happens on the coast of Kerala at some point will, via the Indian Ocean, affect Indonesia and Burma. So, because the Earth is interconnected, tidal waves, Earth shifts as in tectonic plates, weather, they affect all of us at a global level. So it's not possible to say that, oh, there is a pocket on Earth which is untouched by what's going on. There's no such place. That's idyllic. That's an ideal. And to my mind, that's frankly naive.
So we will take one more question. After that,
Yeah.
we say that we can continue with more questions because all are asking, all are putting questions here because they know all that they have got an institution.
You could do one thing, Tanmoy.
Yes.
Once we stop, people can mail you the questions. You can collate them and send it to me.
Yes.
Because there
It
will
would
be
be better.
repetition. So please sort them, because I don't want to go on writing the same answer to several people. And if
Yes.
there are 200
Yes.
questions, till I retire, I'll be answering your questions. That's not going to work.
Yes.
But you can collect them, and I will give pointers grouping questions. So please group the questions and send them to me.
Yes.
You
Yes.
send me the email rather than give my email. So I don't want
No.
18,000
I'm
emails
not
in my
going to
box.
give them that. So
Okay.
I will send you personally.
Yeah.
So last questions we will take, sir.
Yes,
It's
please.
from Dr. Sushant Kumar Sahu. Is human-centric attitude associated with Anthropocene?
Yes, absolutely. And the human-centric attitude is what has produced much of the problems on Earth. The arrogance which we have said, this is us, this is what we are, this is what we do, this we are supreme, etc., has resulted in this particular situation where we have decided that we own the Earth. So until such time as we have repaired the attitude we have embodied, there is very little hope.
So with this, we end the session. Now I request our student. Friends are still here. You can friends. They have joined this forum today. You can see them here in this private chat room.
Mhm.
Now request our students of UG second semester. Hello.
I lost
Yes, sir.
your.
Sorry, sir. I got my connection lost.
Yeah, no
So,
problem.
thank you, sir, for this enriching session. It's really a pleasure to listen to you always, and I think your talk has really extended the canvas of environmental studies to some extent, I can say. Now, I request our student Sinigdha Mondal to give you formal vote of thanks. Sinigdha, yes, you continue.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Snigdha.
I, Snigdha Mandal. Good evening, sir. I, Snigdha Mandal, student of UG second sem, on the behalf of Department of English, Midnapur College Autonomous, would like to thank Professor Pramod K. Nayar, sir, for enlightening us with such a wonderful presentation. I would also like to thank our respected principal, Sir Dr. Gopal Chandra Beda, for giving the permission to arrange such online lecture series. I would also like to convey my gratitude to our respected HOD, uh, Professor Tanmay Kundu sir, who had actually enabled this lecture series to take reality and make our lockdown days amazing. And last but not the least, I want to thank all participants across the globe, um, that they have invested their time to listen to this online lecture series. Thank you to everyone out there. Stay safe. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, sir. I will send you the those questions. Actually, the
Sure.
comment section is getting flooded with questions. So
Okay.
still they
All
are
right then.
sending questions. So I will
Thank you.
collect them and I will mail you them.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
sir.
you, and
Once again,
Saikat. Yeah.
yes.
All right.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye. Bye.